You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to episode 68 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. Connect with us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast or swing by our website, socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in and wishing you a very happy and productive 2019. Now, as many of you know, 2019 is a European Parliament elections year, which is a big deal for a lot of you listeners who are working in different parts of the European Union. So I wanted to start off the year focusing on that. And my guest today is Marta Albertini. She is a digital strategist at G+, which is a global public affairs and communications firm that specializes in political and regulatory risk, advocacy, reputation building, and litigation communications. And what's interesting about Marta's background is she's worked both in the digital campaigning side of B2B, business to business, and also as a consultant for DG Com, or the European Commission's Director General for Communication. So that is the arm of the European Commission that's tasked with explaining EU policies to outside audiences and citizens. So Marta has an interesting perspective on what it's like from the private sector side and the public sector side. So that's largely what this interview is focused on. But we also discuss what's important to consider when you are trying to communicate policy to citizens. And particularly what I think is interesting in this interview is we focus on the generational gap and different media habits and platform use by different segments of the population. So we get into that. We also talk about the role of advertising when communicating policy, the role of content when crafting a successful digital campaign. And we also talk about the 2019 European Parliament elections and what's changed since 2014 in terms of the media landscape and the way that politicians and institutions have been using social media. So it's a great interview to kick off the new year. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Marta Albertini, digital strategist at G+ Europe. Marta, thanks for taking the time out and welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
So why don't we start out with a brief introduction into your background and experience in digital campaigning, because you've been working in this space for some time. How did you get involved in digital and what type of work were you doing before joining G+?
Indeed, I've spent the last 6 years in Brussels working on digital communication from different perspectives. I started in a media company where I was doing social media manager, mainly managing the community, building, the audience in Brussels and outside Brussels, and promoting, of course, the content of the media. And then I moved, I ran some corporate and social media campaigns for trade associations, which was very interesting because I moved then to more of a business-to-business campaign. And so learning more how to approach the content from a corporate perspective on social media, mainly Twitter and Facebook. And then I worked for the European Commission as a consultant in digital communication for a few years as well. And now I'm in G+.
Yeah, and I want to get into that difference between the private and public sector in a second. But first, can you tell us a bit about G+ and what type of campaigning you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, of course. G+ is a leading public affairs and communication firm, which is based not only in Brussels, but also in Berlin, London, and Paris. And we run digital campaigns for several clients, mainly in the pharmaceutical sector, but also health, transport, and in the digital copyright sector. We work on different kind of digital campaigns, mostly social media, raising visibility to the client profile, but also looking at potential crisis communication and using social media as a sort of a complementary part for the big communication plan for our clients.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that quite a few times, this idea of social media promoting visibility. Why is that important?
Well, Brussels is very particular when it comes to digital strategy. We rarely sell a product or a service. We use social media to influence specific policy decision, for example, or to reach out to a specific target audience that most of the times are either policymakers, lawmakers, or citizens. So it is being visible having a strong digital presence is part of your ways to gain visibility also on new legislation piece, for example.
Right. And I guess that can be particularly important when it's sort of hardcore policy issues that might not be immediately translatable to the sort of normal citizen who might not be interested in trade policy, for example.
Indeed. So what is very challenging in doing social media campaigns in Brussels, particularly in a more business-to-business environment, is to really translating policy papers and specific corporate papers into social media messages, which needs to be engaging and user-friendly. So this is probably the most difficult part, because we do like to use simple language, and this is what social media is about. Short, so to be concise, consistent, and also to be creative. And making sure that the policy papers end up in a tweet, it's very challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine. But I want to ask, because you used to work in DG Com, what are some of the differences in campaigning from the private sector versus working for a government institution such as the European Union?
There are many differences. First of all, the target. I think in my previous experience prior to the European Commission and my current experience here, we do deal with lawmakers, policymakers, and companies. So stakeholders that are in a specific industry sector, they already know the field, they already know the sector as well. So the difficulty there is to be visible, to gain their engagement, to gain their trust on social media. When it comes to running business to citizen kind of digital campaigns, then it's a totally different territory. What I find very interesting nowadays is the fact that you need to consider different generations on social media. 5 years ago, you would only have young people or business people. Now you really have to consider different generations, from Generation X to Generation Z. So you need to always plan ahead with what is your audience. And if you have a very different audience, then you need to develop your strategy in different channels. I would never suggest to reach out to young citizens using Twitter, for example, nowadays. Why don't you use Instagram or Snapchat? So there are different channels for different generations. And when it comes to running strategies which target citizens, then it becomes more challenging to reach out to them. Another difficulty is the language. When we draft strategy from Brussels, you also have to be aware of the fact that language is a potential threat or opportunity, because the moment you think ahead and you speak the language, you produce videos, you produce tweets or social media messages in the local language, then you might have reach out to those citizens that are not linked to Brussels at the moment, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to pick up on this idea of generation. Because I'm noticing it myself as I get older, and the generation below me is much more Snapchat, Instagram. I'm kind of the Facebook generation. I think a bit older than me is more Twitter. How do you actually get at the patterns of use on the different platforms for the generations? I mean, what type of approaches are you doing to sort of see how different generations use different social media?
Well, I think we do know from society by talking to young people and less young people. Looking at my generations, I'm one of the millennials, so I do know that my span of attention is relatively shorter than my parents' one, and longer than my cousins, who is 16 or 18. So it's having always open eyes to what the society likes. And I grew up professionally in the video environment, in audiovisual. So videos for me have been always the example to see what kind of data is relevant. For example, when it comes to producing videos for a business-to-business campaign or for a business-to-citizens campaign, there is a big difference there in the way you develop the video, in the way you gather the data. So I think it's more in terms of having the main quote, the main message in the first part of the video, in the first seconds, because then you're going to have the attention of almost everyone. But the moment you run a 2-minute video or even a 60 seconds video, then you lost already a part of the audience. And yeah, but it's always depend on the kind of campaign you do. It's a business-to-business campaign. You have a very specific target audience. You know the kind of the age, the geography, the language this audience speaks. So it might be easier in a certain way than running, campaigns for citizens.
Yeah, and I'm curious, when would you really focus on that Generation Z? I mean, from a political standpoint, a lot of them can't vote, so maybe they're not the target audience for political campaigns.
Yeah.
But when would you actually target this younger demographic?
It really depends on the topic of the campaign. I think even if it's a business-to-business campaign, but you want to reach out to, in a particular part of your campaign, you want to reach out to the citizens, you need to consider this factor because they might have the engagement you need to reach out to a political decision afterwards. And if the political decision is your objective, the change of a political decision, then they should also be taken into consideration in your campaign.
Right. And I mean, we're focusing specifically on this digital and social media, and you touched on it a bit before, but I want to ask why that's important, having this digital presence, specifically in the context of Brussels, because, it is quite a crowded space in terms of policymakers, trade associations, and the like, working with the institutions. What does the digital or social offer that traditional forms of campaigning might not?
I think it's looking at social media as a more of a traditional channel nowadays, rather than just the new media, something to add or to top up to your traditional campaign. Because the way we retrieve news is not just by checking on a website, going to a website or reading the news in the classical way. It's most of the times checking on Twitter nowadays. So being out there, having a digital presence, engaging with your audience, and try always to be up to date to what's happening at political and policy level. I think it's a good way to show that your company is relevant, has a sort of authority, and then can be trusted when they are, when they release any news or any content. And I think it's also a change of perspective. If I think of digital communication 6 years ago, it was really, especially from a business perspective, clients were quite scared to be out there. They were scared to be open, to be visible in a sense. Like they wanted to be visible, but they were scared of the reactions at social media level. But nowadays it's more structured, the approach. And I think it's getting more and more there when you need to be on social media to communicate. And it might be easier to reach out to an MEP on digital level rather than traditional, for example. It can happen.
Yeah. So if the digital campaigning is kind of normalized, or there's some kind of best practices, I think is what you're getting at, how do you see innovation fitting in there? I mean, do you think there is a reward in innovating, or is there still a bit of risk? How do you see that in terms of adopting new features, for example, or trying new formats in terms of creative?
Again, I think it always depends on the campaign you're running, but I'm more of a risk taker, like let's try this way and see if it works, rather than these are all the risks we are going to have if we go this way. But of course, it's a responsible risk. Like when you run digital campaigns, you also have to be aware of the potential risk you have in terms of content, in terms of reaction, and making sure you assist client and you advise the client to do the right way at the right time on a digital level, and to implement innovation. Like why not having a virtual reality event or this kind of new innovative projects that can help at getting even more visibility in Brussels, but always doing it in a responsible way, making sure that you know the risk you're taking and what could be the potential threats as well.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that there is a bit more risk-taking on the B2B side than the government side. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is correct, because I think it's also to look where is the industry on digital level. Like sometimes we're just talking, we want the campaign on Twitter, we want the campaign on Facebook, but they might not be there. Why don't we look on LinkedIn, for example? LinkedIn is a social media that wasn't that known and used 5 years ago, but I can see in the Brussels bubble, it's becoming more and more the tool for exchanging ideas, using blogs, sharing videos. So it's important to know the industry, to know where your audience is, and based on that, you also be more creative in the way you're delivering the message.
Mm. And you mentioned earlier that that Twitter and Facebook are kind of the main platforms that you're working with. Why is it that those platforms are important? I mean, is it just because they have the most users, or is there something else to that?
I've started my career using Facebook and Twitter for digital campaigns on a business level. I think they are the most used when it comes to industry. LinkedIn as well nowadays. I rarely have clients using, like industry clients, very willing to spend money on Instagram, for example. But that makes sense because probably the main audience is not there yet.
Right. And what about YouTube? Does that fit in at all?
Yes, it does. I think videos are very important. As I was explaining earlier, the span of attention is getting shorter and shorter. And I think videos and visuals in general help, gather the attention of the audience. YouTube is a good tool. I think for many it's seen as a repository of videos, when actually can be a very active social media. When I was working at the European Commission, for example, I was consulting them on how to revamp the strategy for the YouTube channel. And indeed, there was a need to be out there in a more active way by using it as a live feeding channel. So showing press conferences, for example, or making sure that we were doing videos for the YouTube audience. But again, on the business side, it always depends on the kind of business and how you can best visualize the service you're doing and the company itself and the company's message on videos.
Right. And I'm wondering, to what extent are advertisements important for running a proper campaign in terms of paying to promote content or channeling directly to the right audience? I mean, is advertising a big part of your work?
It is. When I started working on digital campaigns, I think only Facebook had the possibility to do paid promotion, and then slowly Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram came, and I think it's necessary nowadays. I consider the target audience the first rule you need to have when you start thinking of a digital campaign, and this is the best way to reach out to the people who can engage in a qualitative way with your content. So yes, it is necessary. Going organic, maybe Twitter, if you really do a good study, mapping out all the stakeholders and the real interested people in a specific sector, for example, then yes, you can work organically. But I would strongly suggest to run promoted tweets and, to do social media advertising, definitely.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that because, there's been a lot of changes in terms of labeling political ads in the ad review process. And I mean, I think directly or indirectly, you're working with political ads in some capacity. I mean, have you noticed any sort of changes there in the advertising with either the review process or paying attention more to the creative that's being put out?
Yes, I've seen a change, but what I would like to underline is the fact that I know this paid promotion has taken a negative perception to people, but it's actually, if you follow the rules, it's a good tool to reach out to the audience that you need. It's like TV advertising, if you follow the rules, then your campaign will be successful. And of course, there have been some improvements in the sense of privacy and in the last 5 years, for sure. You always have to play responsible there as well.
Right. And sticking on this idea of kind of controversies and data privacy, GDPR rolled out this year. Has that changed anything in how you're approaching or implementing digital campaigns?
Of course, it has. And we are always, making sure that everything is GDPR compliant.
Mm. And I mean, is that taking a bit more, resources in terms of, things that you have to do? I don't know the ins and outs, like reporting to a data privacy officer or something like that. I mean, how has it affected your work?
Well, we make sure that we don't cross borders, and we make sure that we play by the rules again. So this is our, we are aware of the GDPR, and then we have to respect it, of course.
Mm-hmm. So apart from that, what are some of the key challenges when crafting a digital campaign? I mean, what are the strategies that you use to overcome those challenges as well?
So first of all, one of the challenges, as I said, it's making sure you simplify the message, particularly in an environment as Brussels. It's very difficult to translate policy papers or anything that is political into something simple and, user-friendly. So this is the first challenge, I would say. Analyzing your audience will also help you to see if there is a need of using different languages, for example. Running pan-European campaigns, language is one of the challenges that you need to know, and in terms of resources and efforts as well, this needs to be considered. And then, of course, it's the way, we are all diverse as a way we think in Europe, and you need to really understand how you can better, for example, deliver a message in Spain or in Denmark. It's a different way. So you have to be aware of this as well.
Yeah, and I want to ask a little bit about that. You mentioned the kind of mapping out a strategy before the campaign. I mean, how do you actually do that? How would you get at what type of campaign to run in Spain versus Denmark? I mean, I guess G+ has offices in different parts of Europe, so maybe that helps. But I mean, how do you get at those kind of cultural differences in terms of making the most effective campaigns?
Well, we are a multinational office here. So having colleagues from Spain or Italy always help to know a bit what's happening in the country and what is perception of specific topics or issues, for example. And we also brainstorm with the client a lot, so to know what are the challenges, what are the issues, and of course we try to look at what are the trends in the specific country and try to adapt to that.
And I want to ask a bit about data in terms of, the feedback that you get from the platforms in terms of likes and retweets and stuff. I mean, is data analysis part of your strategy and kind of re-messaging those that have engaged with your message? I mean, how are you analyzing data, if at all?
Yes, we do analyze. We set up some KPIs at the beginning of the campaign. We do short-term and long-term analysis. The short terms help us to see if we're going to the right direction. Most of the times campaigns are divided into different phases when you want to raise awareness of a particular policy position, when you want to debate, so, create online debates or organize an event where stakeholders can interact and debate on a specific policy issue. And of course, there is always the follow-up part most of the times. And we think that it's important to have short-term analysis because, first of all, you see your improvement, but also you see where you are lacking, so the weaknesses. And you still have time, by doing short-term analysis, you still have time to fix any problems that you might see. And it's also important to see who is engaging with you, because the audience you start with might not be, it might increase by the end of your campaign. And these are all contacts that we really recommend our clients to keep alive, because, and this is why we don't believe in a sort of 3-week social media campaign as a sort of a strategy, because we think that by doing that, you might have a shout, like a big voice during this week, but then you will lose your audience, you will lose the engagement. And this is not, it's a missed opportunity for the client and for the campaign itself. So we look at who is engaging with us. We look at the quality of the engagement, because working on a B2B campaign, it also means that you can strengthen your relationship among industries or between companies or between stakeholders. So it's always important to have a look at what's happening in the digital aspect and maybe start an offline follow-up, for example. So it's very important to look at who is engaging. The numbers are important as well, of course. Also to see if you're going to the right direction or not. If you're writing tweets or Facebook messages that are not really gathering a lot of attention, then perhaps the way you're writing the content is wrong. So why don't we improve that? And the final long-term overview looks at the way we started and what we reached and what's next, of course.
And speaking of what's next, we've got the 2019 European Parliament elections coming up next year. And there's been so many changes in the past 5 years since the last one in 2014. For you, what are the biggest changes in the media landscape in terms of campaigning that you've seen in the past 5 years?
Yes, so a lot of things have changed. Like, I think it's like a lifetime compared to 5 years ago. I was working in digital and in social media when the last European elections were happening. And I can say that, first of all, the media landscape was different in Brussels. There were more small and different media. Well, now we have fewer and bigger media companies. So the way the news are released is different. Twitter was the king social media at the time. I remember that all the politicians, the next European commissioners, they had to be on Twitter. They had to start being visible online. Now, I think there are more social media, so I can say that Twitter will still be very relevant during the next elections. LinkedIn will be also a very important channel, I think, more for business and stakeholder side for politicians. Instagram will be, and I hope will be, the time where we will see some nice and friendly photos and videos and Instagram stories from politicians, perhaps with less ties and more coffee. I don't know what will be the strategy there. But a lot of things have changed. I think, if we look at the content of the last European elections, videos were not really a thing on social media. I don't even remember if they were if it was possible to upload them natively on Twitter and Facebook. So a lot has changed in this in using visuals as well on social media. So I expect a lot more visual, a lot of more videos that are not just the perfect kind of corporate style video from a politician, but more the human side, looking at using videos for presenting testimonials, for example, to see more of the human side of politicians. I think that's what I would like to see as well as a change of the political campaigns.
Now, since you're out of the institutions, I think I can ask you this question, because I know that people working in the institutions in different parts in social media, they kind of look at what the others are doing. They're kind of looking at each other and seeing who's doing best. Who would you say is the best digital campaigners from the EU institutions?
From the EU institutions. You mean the official accounts?
Yeah, like the Commission,
European Commission, Parliament. This is tough. I think they are, compared to 5 years ago, they improved, they structured their approach to social media. I think they're trying their best to reach out to different kind of citizens and, different kind of audience. And it's very important they are using more and more different languages, which is also very important. And they also have a different role. And this is why I can't tell you which one I prefer, in a sense that it really depends on the moment, the political moment. And it also depends on the topics as well, because the Commission might propose something really nice, really engaging on social media, but then the Parliament might have a highlight time in another period of the year. So I think their communication is improving, is quite good. I think there is room for improvement as always. But no, they're trying their best to be out there on digital and trying to make it more friendly and, not just looking at young people, but also a more diverse audience as well.
Right. Put you on the spot a little bit there. But one last question for you, which is about your work at G+ when European elections are going on. Is there an uptick in political activity from your end, from this kind of consulting part? Or is it just, I guess, what drives activity as well? Is it around certain policies that are hot in the media? Or when do you get this uptick in campaigning?
I think it's very important to underline the fact that during the European, during the campaigns will be, a different way for us to do business. And what will be very interesting is how to reach out to the new MEPs, for example, or the new European Commission when it will be appointed. So this will be a very interesting part for G+ to be out there and to really help clients to strengthen new relations with the new lawmakers, for example.
Right. And I think elections are when the innovation happens. Is that your experience?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's if 5 years ago everyone wanted to be on Twitter, for example, I remember this as a fact. I'm really curious to see what will happen in these European elections, because I think almost everyone is on social media now. Is it about getting the most engagement on politicians' pages or else? So it will be very exciting to see what will be the new innovation and with this next election.
Yeah, I agree. And this has been super interesting. Marta, thanks so much for taking the time and coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
I've just been speaking with Marta Albertini, digital strategist at G+ Europe. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, you can always follow us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast. Sign up for the newsletter at socialmediaandpolitics.org. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.